What's up guys, welcome to a new SAP S/4HANA Cloud Knowledge Snippet. In today's snippet we will be looking at extensibility and how we use this to cater to a customer requirement. Now the customer's requirement was that he wanted to be able to, on the Fiori Launchpad, have a KPI tile that would instantly provide him some information around his customers that had reached certain sales volumes targets. So for argument's sake, we have a target of tier 1, which is, for example, $1,000 US, and then we have a tier 2, which is $2,000. So the scenario would be that if a customer hits $1,000, then we would issue a rebate or a credit for 2%, and if he reaches the sales volume of $2,000, then we issue him a credit for 3% as an example. So this was all done using the custom KPI tiles functionality, and I already have a posting on this, so I won't dwell too much on this. But right here you already have visibility of this KPI tile that was built. So instantly you have the information telling you that you have 5 customers that have reached the tier 1 level. So you have 5 customers that have reached a sales volume of $1,000 US, and you have 3 customers that have reached a volume of $2,000. Now, of course, with all these KPI tiles, they're not just there to make the screen look pretty. They actually provide and deliver information, and they're full-blown applications. So if we click on this KPI tile, we'll open an application that provides the information as the customer wanted it. So we have down here at the bottom, we have the sales organization, the customer number, and the material group, which yielded the sales volume with this customer. And what we also have showing up on the graph here is the tier 1. So it's a constant line showing the $1,000 tier 1. And then we also have the second constant line along the x-axis showing the 2,000 tier 2 target. And then we have some customers, as we can see here, that have gone beyond the 1,000 sales volume target, and some have gone above and beyond the $2,000 US sales volume. Now, as part of this KPI tile and application that we provided, there was also some additional things that were provided, such as, for example, the ability to have some mini charts that provide you some additional information, as well as the ability to then also have different evaluations, such as, for example, the ability to drill down and look at the data via different axes or different ways to slice and dice the information. You could also have information pertaining to the volumes to reach. So for some of those customers that may not have reached certain targets, what was the volume that they would need to be able to hit in order to reach those targets. So let's just quickly go back. Now the idea of let me just go back. So the idea of this graph was to show which customers, for which combinations of customer material group did they reach those sales targets. And the idea was then to be able to export this information to a spreadsheet, and based on those customers that had hit those targets, calculate based on a percentage the credit that had to be issued to the customer. So as an example, this customer here who made a $3,220 US target, he's exceeded the $2,000 mark, so he would, for example, be eligible for a 3.4% credit. Now, whilst this was exactly what the customer wanted, you can, I guess, quickly kind of see that it's going to get a little bit tedious because, yes, it's great. You have all the information that is shown to you. You can have it in a graphical way, in a tabular fashion. But the problem is that you still have a lot of manual processing that is required. So you're going to have to export this information into Excel. Then have your formulas, and once you've calculated the credit that you're going to issue to a customer, you have to go back into the system and create those credits manually one by one, or you could also leverage an API to create those. But nonetheless, this would be somewhat a tedious task to do. So once we understood what the customer need was, what it was that they wanted to achieve, we were able to come back with a differently thought out solution, and leveraging extensibility within S4 Cloud provide for a much leaner solution that would provide, that would in effect check all the boxes, i.e. provide visibility around who were those customers that had reached those targets. If they had reached those targets, calculate what the credit that they were going to be getting was, as well as issue the credit per se itself. So let's look at what we built through this custom application. Now, before I get into showing the custom application that we built for this customer, I just want to give a quick shout out to my colleague Arun Nair, and who wrote a blog, and I'll link the description. I'll link the link to his blog in the description of this video, so that you can also refer to it. And Arun essentially did a fair bit of heavy lifting for me, in that he's provided information around the setting up of the communication scenario that I will need in my custom application. And he was also using some logic in his blog to update a sales order. In my case, I'll be doing something a little bit different, but again, I just want to give credit where credit is due, and a lot of the information that I needed came from Arun's blog, as well as a couple of chats that I had offline with Arun on this particular topic. So please do have a look at it. And what I will not cover in my video is this setup here of the communication user and the communication arrangements. However, I will just say that you need those if you are going to try and replicate what I have done. So you'll need to set up the custom communication scenario that Arun talks about in his blog. And then instead of creating the SAP COM 0109 communication scenario, you'll need to create one by copying the 158 communication scenario, which is the credit memo request creation. Okay, so once we've got that out of the way, let's go back to the Fiori Launchpad. So let's look at what we have done. And actually, before we do that, let me walk you through the logic of the application, how we've done that. So what we did in the S4 cloud system was we created a custom business object, which was called sales volumes, which was going to capture information around who the customer was, what the volume, the target volumes were, what were the percentages that they should be getting if they reach those targets, as well as the material groups on which those volumes were based on. So we have this custom business object with some business logic. I've indicated some business logic here because we've embedded some code that would, for example, allow you to retrieve the sole two-party name on the basis of the sole two-party number that you would put in the custom business object. Similarly, we've already also done something like that for the material group. So you enter a material group code, and upon saving your entry, the system is going to fetch the material group name. Now, the reason for why that was done was so that at least there was some kind of a check to make sure that the sole two-party number or the material group that you had entered was a valid value in the system. So the custom business object is created, and we'll look at it in just a moment. Then we have some business logic associated with this custom business object that goes and queries a CDS. In this particular case, we were querying billing data, which is the basis of the sales volume. Then once the CDS had been queried and we had summed together the invoices that had been issued to the customer so as to retrieve the total amount invoice to the customer in a certain period of time. The information is brought back to our business logic, and the business logic then also updates the custom business object with the information of the sales volume that this customer had achieved. We also have additional business logic implemented here so as to calculate if the customer had reached the tier 1 and or tier 2 targets, what the credit should be. Plus there is some logic as well to say, well, if he reached the target 1 as well as target 2, we're only going to issue 1 credit for the target 2, as opposed to issuing a credit for the 2 tiers that he might have reached. So at this point, this is all well and good. We are able to automate what the customer would have done via this Excel spreadsheet. So the custom business object was able to retrieve the information around the sales volume automatically, which we also had in the KPI app. And then also on that basis is able to calculate what the credit should be to the customer and if he is eligible for it. However, at this point, what this means is that you still need to have somebody that is going to look at this credit amount and into the S/4HANA Cloud system actually create the credit. So it's not great because we still have a lot of manual input that is required here. So what we did was we again leveraging the extensibility within the custom business object is we added an additional business logic to this custom business object, and what that did was it would then make an API call to our S/4HANA Cloud system. So the S/4HANA Cloud system is, if you like, calling itself, but it's looking as though it's being called upon from the outside world. And what we are doing here is, via this business logic, is we are fetching from the custom business object the credit amount that had been calculated, and if there is a credit amount issued to the customer, we then via this API call actually go off and create the credit memo in the system. And if the credit memo creation is successful, we then also update the custom business object with the credit memo number. So the custom business object at this point really has all the information that is needed to further slice and dice the information in a graph as we had seen at the beginning. And by that I mean that we have the customer number, the name, the material group, the volume that he achieved, the tier 1 and the tier 2, the percentages that he would be owed, as well as the credit amount that is issued to him. And via the memo we have confirmation that the actual credit memo was created. So that's what we've built, and that's what I'm going to quickly show you in the S4 Cloud system. Okay, so now we're back in the S/4HANA Cloud system, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up again this graph because we'll need some information from it in just a moment, and we are going to look at the custom business object that we created. So the custom business object we created was called sales volumes tiers. Because we are looking at the achievement or reaching the sales volume tiers. So the first thing that you need to do when you set up a custom business object is, of course, you need to define its structure. In other words, what are the fields and nodes that you are going to be using to hold information for this particular custom business object. And in this case, we have two nodes. So we have a parent node, which is the sales volumes tiers. And you can see that it holds information regarding the customer, his name, the validity of this particular entry. We also have here the target revenue. So that would be the tier 1, as well as the target revenue tier 2, and then the bonus rates. So if the customer sales volume reaches the tier 1, we would issue the credit for this particular percentage, and if the customer reaches tier number 2, we offer him a credit based on this percentage. And then we have some fields here, such as the volume achieved. So this is a field that would that is going to be automatically updated by the custom business object. We also have the calculated bonus. So this is what I just explained. So if the customer is eligible for a bonus, the amount calculated is going to get updated in this particular field. Then there are some additional information fields that we have here, such as is consistent, and the is consistent checkbox are to make sure that the calculation can go ahead, or we have captured sufficient information for the calculation of the volume to be calculated. Because there is no point in, for example, querying a CDS if you forgot to give the customer number. So there are certain checks that are done programmatically, and if everything checks out, so if I have indicated a sold to party, if I have indicated a target revenue, for example, then we would consider the information to be consistent, i.e. we have enough for the system to be able to go ahead and query the CDS. And then we also have the release status here. So the release status is referencing a code list of values, and this is of course totally optional, but you can understand that this is quite sensitive information that we are working with here, and also we don't want to issue a credit without having done our due diligence. So as we'll see, the release status allows you to provide a status on where you're at with regards to capturing the information. And by that I mean that maybe you have not yet indicated the material groups on which this customer is measured upon. So you don't want to calculate his volume achieved, and you also don't want to try and issue a credit for him. So this allows you to keep track where you're at, and again we have certain checks. So for example, if the release status is just in preparation as an example, then I want to prevent the calculation of the volumes or credit memos. Then we have a child node, which is material groups, because what we want to do is we want to measure this customer not just based on the overall sales volumes that he's achieved with me. There are certain material groups on which he's measured upon. So the volume upon which he will be measured upon need to also be indicated. So that's for the definition of the fields, the structure and the fields that will make up my custom business object. And then the last tab that we'll go to is the logic. And you can have some logic at each one of these nodes. So for example, if I go to material groups, we see that we have after modification and before save logic that is possible. And on the sales volumes tier, so the top node of the hierarchy, we on top of those after modification and before save have a couple of additional actions. So these two after modification and before save logics, they would appear if on the general information tab you would have activated determination and validation. So these two logics automatically are prepared for you to use if you use that checkbox in the general information tab. And essentially the after modification logic will kick in after you've input information, or after you've changed, after you've modified a field, and the before save will kick in just before you try to save your entry. So if we look at the after modification, and there's also always the notion of draft and published version. So here we have a bit of code in the determination logic that we've added to, for example, in this case, if the target revenue currency is initial, then we so it's blank, we initialize it with the value US dollar so that we have something in there. We also have here, for example, the search of the sold to party, the customer name. So the person entering an entry in this custom business object will put in the sold to party number, and then via custom code logic, we actually go and fetch the name of that particular supplier. Then we have some additional checks around if a field is initial or if a value is compared to another one, if it's in this case greater than. Then we issue certain messages to the user to make sure that the data that they're going to enter is going to be consistent. Then once you've actually added your code, you can test your logic within the custom business object. And what you can do is you can enter, if you like, dummy data in your custom business object as if you would be maintaining an entry. So you put in your dummy data, and then you have a button down here at the bottom, test, which allows you to test your logic. So on the basis of your dummy data, see what the output's going to be, or whether the system does what you expect it to. And if not, then of course you can go and revise your logic. So this is the after modification, and then in the before save, we again have some logic here that we've also added. So for example here, if the value of the target revenue is blank, then we issue a message, the target revenue must be greater than 0. Again, just to make sure that all the information that's going to be entered is going to be consistent with what we're trying to achieve here. So the most interesting part of what we are trying to do in this particular application is, number one, calculate the customer credit. So again, this is some logic where we use a CDS, and in this case we are looking at the iBilling documents item cube to determine the sales volume that this customer has done with me on the basis of those material groups for which I've sold materials to him. So again, all of this logic, I will put it up into the blog entry as well, so you can refer to it if need be. But also here you can see that you can embed your own logic. So for example, if the release status, which is what I was saying earlier on, if we are at a release status of, for example, in preparation, we do not want to allow for this calculation to go ahead. So you can of course add in your own logic in this custom logic. And then lastly, the next action that we've done is actually the creation of the credit memo. So this is the actual call to the whitelisted API to create the credit request in the system. So again, here you'll find, you'll see these codes, and you'll quickly understand when you look at Arun's blog how these values fit in. So these are your communication scenario, your custom communication scenario, and then we have the logic of the program. So the first part is that we need to retrieve a CSRF token to be able to then call the system by leveraging a post message. So once we've acquired the CSRF token, we can then actually call the API. But just before we call the API, we need to build the payload. So based on the information that is in my custom business object entry, I need to retrieve the information that I need, such as the customer number, the amount that I'm going to be issuing the credit for, as well as the sales organization, and so on and so forth. So this is what we are doing here. So if you've already tried, especially using a JSON feed to invoke a S/4HANA Cloud API using the post call, then this is going to be very familiar to you. So we concatenate the various fields that we need. So we build up the payload, and then essentially we call this whitelisted API, which is the credit memo request service, and we call the creation of the credit memo. And then lastly, what we do is, because we want to update the credit memo number in the custom business object, we have to retrieve from the response of the post call the actual credit memo number. So for that, I had to use a little bit of regular expressions and look at the response, which is in XML format, and extract the information that is between the credit memo request tags, which of course is the credit memo number. And then we pass at the end a quick message to let the user know that the credit memo has been requested, and we give him the number as well. And we also update our custom business object with this credit memo number so that we can at any point in time refer to that information directly in the custom business object. So now that we have quickly gone through this particular custom business object, let's see how it really works from a user's point of view. So from a user point of view, the way that this app works is that we have generated a UI for it when we published the custom business object. So we then end up with a tile that you can obviously position, or the user can position where he wants in the Fiori Launchpad. So I'm just going to launch the application, sales volume tiers, and you can see that we already have a few entries, but typically the user, what he would do is he would go into plus to add a new entry. And again, you can see some of the various fields that we already had in the custom business object that we looked at 2 minutes ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter the information that we need. So we could put 1710 for the sales organization, the sole to parties. So for that, I'm going to refer to the other KPI tile that we had. And so then the customer number is going to be this one here. So 0017102349. Now we also have a validity date here. So typically when you issue a credit to a customer, it's going to be based on the basis of the volume that he's achieved over a certain period of time. It's a bit like frequent flyer points. You know, if you reach a certain number of miles, then you'll get this particular silver, gold, platinum status. And it works exactly the same way. So for example, here we're going to say that it runs from the 1st of January 2018 through to, let's say, the end of the year, so 31st December 2018. But of course, you could adjust those dates to whatever you want them to be. The target revenue we're going to say is $1,000 US dollars for tier 1. And if the customer reaches this level, we're going to issue a 3% credit, and if he reaches the 2,000 US, then he'll get a bigger bonus at 3.5. So then we indicate the release status. I'm just going to say ready for calculation just to avoid having to revisit that later on, and that's a status at which I need to be in order to allow for the calculation to happen. Now I'm just going to say save at this point, and so we have the record number 6 that has just been created. And what you can see is that on the basis of the number that I indicated, the system, thanks to some logic that we have added, has gone out and fetched the sole to party name. So at this point, it gives me confidence that this sole to party actually exists in my system. The next thing that we need to do is we need to say, well, for which material groups am I going to be measuring the achievement of this particular sole to party? So again, I do the same thing here. I'm going to add a material group, and the material group that we are interested in is this one, L001. L001, and I'm going to say save. And again, the same thing has happened here in that we have gone out and retrieved the name of the material group, which again is a plus for me in that I know that this is a material group that does exist in my system. So we now look at the record that we've just created, and there are a couple of fields missing. So the volume achieved, which hasn't yet been triggered, the calculated bonus as well, and the credit memo. Now we have here these two buttons which are linked to the two actions that we had created in the business object, the custom business object. So you can trigger those two actions from the object right here, or you can also do that from within the list view that we have got here. So this is the record that we just created, and if we once again look at the data, the sales volume target, so for this customer and the material group that we have created, we would expect a volume achieved of 1.40K to be calculated when we trigger the calculation of the customer credit. So let's go ahead and do that. I've selected my line. I'm going to say calculate customer credit. So the system goes off, has a bit of a think about it, quite quickly in fact, and you can see that he has in fact quite correctly calculated an amount of 1.4K, which is what we also had in our graph. So the system has determined that because the amount of volume achieved was greater than $1,000 but less than $2,000, a 3% credit was calculated. So this is the amount of $42.02, which we now need to issue as a credit to the customer. So before we actually trigger that, let's go and refresh the list of credit memo requests that already exist in the system, and we see that the last number is 39. So again, I'm going to select my record and trigger this action of creating the credit memo. So once again, the system goes off, has a little bit of a think about it, and we can see here it's telling me the credit memo 40 has been created. My custom business object also gets updated with the number of the credit memo, so it gives me confidence that the calculation has been done and the credit memo has been created. And I can of course go back to my standard credit memo application, just refresh it, and I can see that my credit memo 40 does indeed appear. So we also have a customer reference, which is the concatenation of the word credit with the year 2018 and the sold to party number. Now this is a logic that of course you could have had completely tailored to your own requirements. And we can see that the value of the credit is $42.02, which is exactly the amount that we had also determined in the custom business application. So there you go. This was a solution to a real customer problem. Of course, has a lot of benefits, and in terms of setup, as you will have seen, was quite simple, and everything was done within S/4HANA Cloud. There was no need to have the cloud platform or any additional tools to set this up. This was completely done within the context of S/4HANA Cloud. So I hope you've enjoyed this recording, and if you did, then please subscribe to the channel, press the like button, and turn on notifications to be advised of new recordings as and when they become available. Thank you very much.